Hey everybody, welcome back. I had a good request from, I think it was Half Moon Lake Herps or something. Sorry, I forgot the name wrong. Um, Requesting a video about, the things I've failed at, or the negative things that have occurred during um, the mistakes I've made during, my years in the industry, and that's actually a great topic. Um, Now, I haven't had a ton of mistakes, I would say, because I was pretty rigorous with how I did things, in terms of husbandry and stuff. But I wanted to kind of cover the things that have happened, and I also wanted to kind of combine that into a video about psychology of the psychology of owning your own business and dealing with the ups and downs of it, because it can be just as hard, if not harder, than your everyday life. So, and just kind of working through those things and trying to find the light at the other end of the tunnel, or knowing when to hang up the boxing gloves. So we can tie that all into one video. Now, this video itself, if you haven't checked out my last two, in my walk and talk series, one was about like an ultimate buyer's guide, the best tips for buyers, and one was an ultimate seller's guide, the best tips I have for sellers, how to succeed in those two areas. So this would be the third one, kind of like the psychology, and my biggest failures and mistakes or issues that I've kind of run into. At this point, by the time this video posts, I'm gonna assume that my lightning pipe clutch is gone, no snakes left. So at this point, I'm also going to assume that I still have that Freedom Breeder rat rack left. If anybody's interested, hit me up at local pickup in Pittsburgh. But I'll be done making videos soon, because unless I keep getting requests, these couple last walk and talks that I have kind of that I want to talk about, one's probably going to be about overall husbandry. After that, I'm going to be done making videos. So if there's anything important that you want to talk about, or you want me to talk about, discuss, cover, get those comments in down below before it is too late. I'm not going to come back. I know some people comment on videos that are 5 years old, and expect me to answer it, or don't pay attention to when the video is posted. But if you see this video in 3 years, it's going to be too late. So as of, maybe I'll talk about like the failures or mistakes I've made and how they've psychologically affected me and how I kind of got through it. Because I know psychology, whether it's family or your love life or your business or your job or personal stuff, it's the ups and downs of life are a nightmare to get through. I've had, just to be sort of a little open, so I can, I guess, connect with people to kind of explain where I'm coming from. Most of my videos are upbeat. Most of my videos are not a lot of me being negative about stuff, because I'm not a negative person. I choose to kind of move on from negative things, but and look at the bright side and just move forward instead of dwelling on the past. But that doesn't mean that I haven't had my fair share of life catastrophes, or things in life trying to tear me down, right? I mean, I've been divorced. My ex cheated on me, which at that point in time was really hard to get through, because my whole thing is I choose to act in good faith with people, right? I treat people the way I want to be treated, and I always assume that they're going to act the same way. But it's hard at first, especially. That was kind of like the first big thing that ever happened to me from having a relationship turn sour that in that sort of a way. It was hard to get through that. It was hard to get over it because I, fully trusted this person and they completely betrayed me, right? And, working through that, and believe me, I'll tie this all into the to the ball python business at the end of the day. I don't drink, right? I'm not a drinker. I've been drunk maybe twice in my life. It's just something I've never done. Oh, look, there's a little baby sheep, a sheep and a lamb. That's cute. So I've never really dove into that as a backup for feeling sorry for myself. It sucked at first. I had a hard time. There's probably a month there where my life was completely upside down and I wasn't doing a good job at being an employee. I wasn't probably doing a good job of being a family member. Luckily, I didn't have any kids, so that wasn't really a issue. But once I realized it was over, which really only took me about a month, I decided to dive into kind of fixing my life. I started eating better. I started exercising more. I started doing a bunch of those Spartan races. I started getting myself, I'm introverted, as I've mentioned before. I got myself into doing meetups. I don't know if they still have that app, but I like hiking a lot. So I would do meetup groups for hiking and try different things. And I just sort of dove into things that were going to positively change my life. And it really helped me to get out of the doldrums of, I've been cheated on. We had just bought a brand new house, a nice house in a nice neighborhood. There was like kind of everything we wanted. And within like 6 months, I found out she was cheating on me, and our lives were turned upside down. I don't even think we were in the house for a full year by the time we had to sell it. So things like that happen to everybody, right? And it's how you choose to deal with those things that kind of define who you are as a person and define where your life's going. And I've had plenty of my adult years haven't been easy by any means. I've had tons of family issues. I've had obstacles, getting remarried and having a stepchild, and she really hasn't been the issue. It's more or less been the co-parenting with the bio dad and the stepmom over there that create issues. I don't even talk to my mom and my sister anymore, and now my brother, because there's a lot of psychological issues. Not that I'm a psychologist and I'm not trying to diagnose anybody, but there's just a lot of stuff going on in my family that is unfortunate, and there are all sorts of things that I've had to choose to make peace with that are kind of out of my control, because I can either choose to dwell on those things, the things that I can't control, and let them define me, or I can choose to make peace with those things and live my life the way that I feel proud of, right? So this pertains to everything you do, and in the business in general. My biggest problem I ever had was that I got and this is very important. If you don't know, you need to quarantine your animals. I don't know the ins and outs of what the recommendations are at this point for how to bring in new animals and where to keep them, because it used to be that you were recommended to have a whole different setup on a whole different area of your house or facility for animals that you're buying and bringing in. Most people, that's not doable. I didn't have anywhere else in my house where I could keep the temperature of the room at 80 degrees without spending millions of dollars on electricity. So I had to keep them in the same room. I just kept them on the opposite side of the room, right? Well, I bought a snake from somebody, actually a more well-known breeder, And it got to me, it was a proven breeder female, laid like 2 or 3 weeks beforehand. It got to me, it was obviously had a respiratory infection the second I got it. She was already sneezing, had the bubbling in her mouth. And I contacted them, and of course the canned response was, oh, that wasn't doing it when it was here, sorry. No, even like, nothing even like, do you want me to take it back, or, can I help pay for the vet bill or whatever? Nothing. So I was like, fuck. Sorry, hopefully I don't get demonetized. I was like, what am I supposed to do? Like, it was the first time I dealt with a respiratory infection. And at this point, I had, I don't know, maybe 100-200 animals come in and out of my facility. It was the first time I ever had to deal with a respiratory infection. I took her to the vet, actually, got some, whatever the medicine they use for respiratory infections to try to make it better, injected her for whatever the proper dosage was for however long I was supposed to. And she initially got better, but it came back. Well, apparently, now this is from what I was told, when this happened 4 years ago, so I don't know what the recommendations are now, or what the diagnosis is. Apparently, they think that these, whether it's nidovirus or other RIs, is that you get them from cross-contamination, not from being airborne. So it's from you, as the handler, going from a sick snake to a healthy snake, and you're transmitting this virus. I didn't know that at the time. I just thought she was sick. So I kept her, away from other stuff, and I wasn't being smart with how I was going through the room. So I cross-contaminated her with maybe 20 other animals. And it turns out that it was nidovirus. So once I figured that out, I spent thousands of dollars testing and retesting all these animals. Was it RL Labs? I forget. It's whatever the lab is in Texas. Swabbing all the snakes. Every snake in my collection. At this point, I probably had 60 or 70 snakes. I went through every month or so for about 6 months or more, until I figured out which ones were sick and which ones weren't. Moved all the sick ones to a separate area, hoping that I could try to fix them, get them better, pay more attention to them, but keep them away from the other snakes so they weren't cross-contaminating everybody else. And it didn't work. And I lost all those, 24 or so snakes. Unfortunately, there's some of my more expensive snakes too. And I probably lost, this was early on, so I wasn't really making money at this point. I was just in debt. And I had maybe lost $40,000-$50,000 in snakes that were unrecoverable, no saving grace, no eggs produced, and most of them were adults too. Lost years of production. And I literally cried. I don't cry a lot because I feel like I process things very well, and I make sense out of things, and I find how things work, why they work, and how I need to kind of move on from it. And this was just something that was like, what happened? What just happened to me? At that time, it was probably like a third of my collection. Some of my more expensive animals, and a lot of my more expensive animals, I didn't have a way to recover from that. I didn't have any extra cash flow. I was in debt. And these snakes were supposed to be producing babies for me that season. It devastated me. I thought at that point that I was done. It was, actually, I was talking to a therapist at that point in time, and I spent like a whole session with him, literally just like crying, talking about this. And he didn't even really know what to tell me. He's like, he was trying to is there something you can do to help them? He didn't know what to say because he didn't know anything about snakes. And he was like, man, it's terrible. All he could do was kind of sympathize with me and say, this sucks. I mean, this is something that is going to be very, very difficult to kind of swallow. And it was, because, you know, you guys out there that buy 3 or 4 snakes and you get one that's sick, you know, it sucks when you lose a $100 snake. It sucks when you lose a $500 snake. I lost tens of thousands of dollars in a matter of a month because somebody shipped me a snake that had a respiratory infection, that had nidovirus. And I followed up with this breeder, and they kind of shrugged it off, like, oh, well, I mean, whatever, you know. So it took a while. You know, I was definitely a lot more cautious about how I handled snakes. It was also at that point in time when I realized that if I'm buying snakes, I need to be more selective how I'm doing it. I didn't want to keep on bringing in and changing over a collection all the time, because I'm bringing in new snakes from other environments, and I didn't know how they were cared for, how the husbandry was, and how what the chances are of them having something infectious that could carry on to my collection. So I realized at that point that I needed to start being very selective, and I needed to start producing my own stuff that I was going to keep, hold back, and breed, so that I didn't have to keep buying things from other people who I don't know if I can trust. So at that point I did. I was like, you know, you have to start somewhere, you have to buy stuff, but, you know, you don't want to be breeding stuff, selling all the babies, and then having to kind of go back to rebuy new things to introduce to your collection. That's why I always advise to buy things that are more genetically diverse, that give you the ability to scale without having to constantly turn over inventory and purchase new stuff from new vendors. It also tells you that you need to be very cautious with how you're handling new animals you're bringing in. You need to keep them separated. I don't believe they need to be in a separate room, but my recommendation is the stuff that you've had long term that you know is healthy. If you're going into the snake room, handle all those first, feed them first, clean their poop first, change their water first, and then after you're done handling them, then you need to go back, go to the other side of the collection that you know is new, that's in quarantine, and handle them. And after that, make sure you're going washing up and making sure that there's no you know disease on you. That's the best way to handle it, but it's it makes it difficult when you just lose everything. I mean, I felt like I lost everything, and most of you guys will never feel that, because I don't know if most of you guys are ever going to put that much money into it or get that far into the process of breeding, in investing. But you need to be careful. You need to be careful where you're buying from. You need to be careful bringing in new snakes to the collection. You need to be careful how you're handling things and how you're producing things and how you're. It all matters. Now, to go along with that, the other thing I learned from that experience is, at least from what I've done, is going to a vet is basically useless. After that process, and I went back 4 or 5 times with a couple different snakes to that vet, and he gave me the proper medicines and the needles and blah blah blah, and none of it fixed anything. I mean, they all eventually died, and there's a waste of money. So, like, you can't go sinking money and more money into things that are already costing you money in terms of a business. And if it's not going to help the snakes get better, if nidovirus is really something that isn't curable, then I wouldn't waste money on trying to take it to the vet and trying to get it resolved. So if you think your snake might have virus, I would swab it yourself, because the vet's going to charge you a shit ton of money to do something that you can do very easily at home. Get the cotton swabs, swab the snake, send it in the R&L labs or whoever does it now, and figure it out. And if it does test positive, then obviously you want to try to talk to that vendor, but then you need to make sure that you're taking that snake and keeping it far away from everything else, and making sure you're keeping clean, and making sure that you're not cross-contaminating anything. And I think that's the biggest issue that I ran into, biggest problem that I ran into as I was going down my breeding journey. It was definitely the biggest obstacle. It was a nightmare. I really don't have any other better way to explain it other than it was a nightmare. What else? Let's see. I never really had issues. The big negative thing I dealt with was breeding the urban camo stuff. Because if you don't know, urban camo, now I believe this is right. The ingredients to make an urban camo is you have to have super cinnamon, sandblast, I think pastel, and het pied. Those are the genes you need to create an urban camo. Beautiful snakes. They were some of the coolest snakes I made. I think they're actually probably some of the snakes that I got the most money for. Now, that has significantly dropped off since I created them. Actually, I was selling them for like over $6,000. But hold on a second, here's people with their dogs, and I have to walk through them because they don't have them on a leash. Of course, people don't put their dogs on leashes. I hate that. So, when you breed super cinnamons, you can get a lot of deformities. They can have deformed spines, they can have deformed faces, they can have faces that aren't even developed, which means basically they're all gonna die straight out of the egg. I talked to some breeders who said, breeding them at a lower or incubating them at a lower temperature fixes that issue, or can help with that issue. And I tried that, but it didn't seem to make a big enough difference for me to want to keep doing it. So I decided to stop breeding that project. And it was actually one of the first projects I got into that was a little more expensive, but I decided to swerve at that point because I couldn't deal with the thought that I was like creating these animals that were obviously not going to survive out of the egg. They weren't going to thrive. They were complete genetic deformities that just doomed the animals from birth. So I think the biggest thing to learn from that is you need to know what your pairing is and what it can produce and what the outcomes of that are, because 95% of pairings don't have any negative consequences, but there are some that do. There are some that are lethal. There are some that produce a bunch of deformities that are obviously advised against to breed. And I'll come back to the age-old hot topic of spider. The spider gene should not be bred. And I believe, if I remember correctly, they did outlaw the breeding of it or selling of it in the United Kingdom. And it should be outlawed here. It's a gene, just a single gene, where it causes... Now, I heard, I don't remember because I didn't really care about it, because I just knew from the start I didn't want to breed it, that there's some deformity that produces it in the inner ear canal. They originally thought it was something wrong with their brain, but I don't know what the actual scientific research produced as to what caused it, but it causes something called wobble, W-O-B-B-L-E, where the snake has a hard time with locomotion. Like, it can't move in a straight line. It can't keep itself upright. It kind of wobbles as it's trying to, like, you know how they periscope and put their heads up? You know, they wobble. The only experience I ever had with it was I bought a snake from Dynasty Reptiles, you know, probably one of my first 10 snakes. And I got it. Was not supposed to have a spider. And it would like crawl across the tub, go up the side, and then go upside down. Like, I had no idea where it was going. So it was like in a U shape, pressing against the top of the aquarium. And then it would kind of like stay upside down, like I didn't know what the hell it was doing. And I mean, just watching that, like, made my heart sink. I was like, like, what is wrong with this animal? And what is wrong with the people that continue to produce this gene? You're a bunch of assholes if you continue to breed spider and think it's okay. The issue with this hobby is that, and really all animal breeding, is that the breeders don't take into consideration that these are living things and that you need to respect them. They look at them as dollar signs. And because, believe me, spider looks cool, I'll admit it, but it makes snakes that are, I don't care if they eat or not. That's not really that's the issue. The issue is that there's obviously something wrong with it, and you're continuing to breed a genetic defect on purpose, knowing that it affects the snake because it doesn't act like a normal ball python, because you think it looks cool and you're going to make $1 or not. Well, guess what? Spiders aren't worth anything at this point because everybody knows about that, knows about wobble. When you go on Morph Market to buy a spider, it'll tell you, note, danger, the snake is going to possibly have some bad wobble, and nobody wants to buy it, so they're not worth anything. So if it's not worth anything, there's no reason for somebody to continue to breed it, because you can breed something else that makes you the same amount of money. So, I mean, you're a giant a-hole if you continue to breed spider, knowing that it does this, and you're purposefully doing this to every single snake that's produced with it. So, you know, I learned more about genetic deformities as I got further into the hobby, the side effects of it, and the mistake of, you know, breeding super cinnamons was something that I stopped doing after I had like those 2 or 3 clutches that one time. And a big portion of those babies came out with deformities. Some of them weren't bad, it was just like a cleft lip, and they survived. They could open their mouth and they could breathe normally and they could eat, and it didn't affect them. But there was plenty of them that their spines were so badly kinked that I don't even know how they hatched out of an egg, because there's no way they'd ever be able to pass food. I mean, their spines were kinked like in a hairpin turn shape. Like, it was sad. So people continue to do that sort of stuff on purpose, knowing that what they can cause, and just devaluing the fact that, okay, well, I can make $3,000 if I hit one snake out of there, but you know, there's potential for me to produce a bunch of snakes that aren't going to thrive or survive, or just be kind of dead out of the egg. It's kind of I think it's a bad look for the hobby. I think if more people knew about that stuff, they would, I feel like I feel like at some point a hammer is going to drop on the industry with the bad practices that people have. And obviously my whole thing has always been there's too much overproduction, and people having bad breeding practices, like breeding genetic deformities on purpose, are a bad look. And at some point there's going to be a bigger hammer that comes down on the industry because it's not policing itself. So I you know, there's people that do it as a living that just don't care, and that just overproduce stuff, and that just overproduce stuff that's not, shouldn't be produced at all. It's gonna end badly for them, I think. So don't be those people. Do the right thing. Learn. And that's, I guess, the biggest takeaway from all this is I didn't know about the effects of nidovirus, or I had never bred animals before, right? So I didn't know that, there's cross-contamination. And then if you have one snake that's sick, it can easily spread across to all of these other snakes, or your whole collection. I knew about spider kind of up front because it came up a lot on YouTube, but I didn't know about the super cinnamon stuff and how serious it was until I had produced it. So I think Morph Market even has, or there was a previous thread or post where somebody had listed all the combos that can cause lethalities or deformities, and there was one that I think it lists all that stuff and all the different things that can occur by bringing certain genes together and just certain genes by themselves. So I would try to look that up and just get a brief overview of it before you decide to dive into those projects. You can breed cinnamons by themselves. Tying cinnamon or black pastel into any other combo is fine. It doesn't do anything. But when you make a super cinnamon, I guess super black pastel, because they're on the same allele, they're allelic genes, so they all kind of have the same problem. And there are more genes in that family. You're gonna get that outcome from all of those. So those are all things you should know up front. But other than those two things, it's kind of hard for me to say if there's anything else any big failure or negative thing that happened. I never had issues with incubation because I always followed the guidelines and made sure that I was doing what I was supposed to do. I did have some of those, everybody seems to have a heating element issue where maybe a thermostat probe falls off of the heating element, and so it burns your snakes. I never had anything to kill a snake. I never had burns that were too severe that weren't able to heal on their own. There were a couple snakes where I had to, get some ointment and clean the burns off for a while, and it took maybe 2 or 3 sheds for the burns to heal over, but there's nothing that was severe that would cause any lifelong issues. So it's just, really about following basic husbandry and just doing your research and learning things. And it would really prevent you from having the vast majority of issues that people run into. I think it's just people being undereducated on what they're doing. I've had customers that said, where I've reached out to them and talked to them, months after them buying something, and how's it going? Oh, they died because my thermostat wasn't working and they cooked. Well, that's easily avoidable. Obviously I feel worse for the animals that got cooked to death in their homes, but I feel bad for the person who spent $4,000 too, because they're not getting that money back. That's money down the drain. But it was something that was easily avoidable. Don't buy $5 thermostats off of Amazon. I'm not telling you to go buy a $400 thermostat for a single tub or for a single house, but if you're buying a cheaper thermostat, you need to make sure that you're monitoring it daily, and use your heat gun, double check the temperature, make sure it's not cooking your animal. But kind of back to the psychology of everything, and you're gonna have your ups and downs you're gonna have animals that don't produce eggs for you. You're gonna have animals die on you. You're gonna have clutches where they're laid and they're all bad. You're gonna have clutches where they come out and you get nothing at all that's useful in terms of furthering your projects or making sales. You're gonna have bad interactions with customers. You're gonna have keyboard warriors and trolls on social media. You're gonna be in debt. Those are all things that are gonna pop up as you're going through the process of breeding, of building your business. And if you know you're doing the right thing, if you know you're doing everything right, if you're well educated, if you're well read, if you've done your research and those things happen, you're gonna know that there are some things out of your power and shit happens. You can't prevent shit from happening. There's always gonna be bad things that pop up. You're always gonna have, people cause problems for you. You're always gonna have acts of God occur. And if you have any solace in the fact that you did everything you could and this was out of your control, it's going to make it easier to kind of move on from that stuff. So the only thing that I can offer you support with in this topic is just know that you know what you're doing. Have some confidence that what you're doing is the right thing. If you feel the least bit in conflict that I don't know if I'm doing this right, then maybe you need to figure it out a little more. It's like the whole incubation thing. And I made a ton of videos about incubation. Go back, look through my channel. People overthink it. There's a dozen different ways to do incubation. I have shouted from the top of the mountains on my channel that everybody makes it too complicated and everybody's doing it wrong. The only thing you need to do is get egg trays or light diffusers, fill the bottom of your egg tub with water, throw it in the incubator and put press and seal on it. You can't screw that up. You don't need to put air holes. You don't need to measure the amount of water mixed in with your vermiculite or perlite. It is foolproof. You have to be a freaking moron to screw that up. But people refuse to listen to wisdom, and they continue to incubate things with perlite or vermiculite, and they're either putting too much water in it or not enough water in it, and it's causing the eggs to desiccate or shrink and lose all the moisture in them, or it's causing them to be moldy because they're sitting in water, basically. When you do it this way, there's a bunch of water, but it's only creating humidity. And instead of people just listening to reason and kind of tried and true methods of doing things, they just continue to do things the way they want to do it, and it creates issues, creates problems, and it makes you lose eggs. So, listen to wisdom. If you don't know what you're doing or you're unsure of it, do more research. And if you would have done more research and came across a video of somebody saying, hey, the whole incubation process is overcomplicated, this is the easiest way to do it. And not only is the easiest way to do it, it guarantees you won't kill your eggs. So, be confident in what you're doing. Do your research. YouTube is the greatest thing to happen to a lot of industries, but the ball python industry, because there's bad information, and there are a bunch of morons that make videos, but there's also a lot of good information. There's a ton of stuff you can learn from Canova. There's a ton of stuff you can learn from a lot of these people putting out content that are sharing their experiences. And my whole channel has been about, at first, sharing my experiences, because I didn't know what the hell I was doing the first couple years I was doing it. But by year 3 or 4, I was very well on my way to knowing what I was doing and not having to second guess it. When I first tried my eggs with just the water in the bottom on top of the egg trays, I wasn't sure that it was going to work, but I started doing it halfway through a season and it did work. And every clutch after that, the rest of that season, it worked with them. To the point where, okay, I tested it, it works. There's no reason to doubt it. I have never lost an egg clutch because of me not having the right amount of water or having too much water, because it's a non-issue. I've taken it out of the equation. So you have to use your brains a little bit. You have to do your research. I feel like every video I'm making here, there's a plane flying over top of my head. But I haven't made a bunch of huge mistakes because I've spent hundreds of hours on YouTube learning stuff and doing my research. And the couple mistakes I did make, well, guess what? Because I didn't do my research, because I was not informed about respiratory infections, because I was not informed about what happens when you breed super cinnamons. Those were easily resolved issues. If I would have known how deadly nidovirus was, the second that I saw that snake with the runny nose and the bubbly mouth, that thing would have been like isolated in a separate. I would have made a separate room work, and I probably would have been more forceful with telling the previous owner that they were going to take it back to get it the hell out of my room. And it sure as hell wouldn't have cross-contaminated and killed 20 of my other snakes. But I wasn't educated. I didn't do my research. I didn't know anything about it. And it caused a giant loss for me. So a lot of the headaches and trauma that can happen with this hobby can be prevented just by knowing how to do things and doing your research beforehand. So, you know, I think we've come full circle with this video, but know what you're doing and it'll help you get through the hard times. But you're gonna hit speed bumps, you're gonna wreck your car, you're gonna have hard times, and just know that you're not the only person out there that's those things are happening to, and you got to power through them. Like, if you're confident this is something you can do, you have the ability to do it, and that you can make some money off of it, or you can make it into a business, then you need to stick through with the hard times, because not everything is going to be positive. There's going to be bad stuff that happens, and there's going to be a lot of good stuff that happens. As long as you're well educated and you're doing things the right way, you're going to have more good stuff than bad stuff. But at the first sign of failure, if you decide to quit, nothing's going to work in your life. You're not going to have a successful marriage. You're not going to have successful friendships. You're not going to have a successful business. And you got to keep going at it. So to wrap up the video, all I can say is you got to keep plugging away. You got to keep going. You got to keep your chin up. You know, take the punches, roll with the punches as they come, and just keep moving forward.